maybe never would. In addition to the DNA and genetic genealogy, this case would not have been solved without the hard work and dedication of our detectives, crime scene investigators, the DA's office, and the other agencies you see here today. Specifically, in March of 2000, retired Detective Pete Willover, behind me, and then Deputy DA Anne Marie Schubert obtained the first John Doe arrest warrant in California based on DNA. Since then, detectives in the DA's office never gave up on the search for this predator who victimized several women in our communities. On Friday morning, agents from the FBI office in Atlanta, Georgia, took our suspect, 59-year-old Mark Mantefeld, into custody at his home in Decatur, Georgia. Investigators from the Sacramento Police Department and Sheriff's Department in Georgia have been assisting FBI with follow-up investigation over the weekend. The suspect in this case will eventually be brought back to Sacramento to face a host of charges that DA Schubert will speak of in a few moments. We understand there are still a lot of questions about who this suspect is. Has he committed other crimes? Our investigators will be working diligently to find answers for our community and those victims. We do know for approximately 2 decades, Mantefeld worked for the Federal Bureau of Prisons and in 2014 retired as a correctional institution administrator from a facility in Miami, Florida. We also know he spent several years here in Sacramento while he attended Sacramento State University and worked for a short time as a part-time lecturer at Sac State. Our investigators have contacted the victim in the city of Sacramento's case. As you would expect, she is extremely emotional and thankful for the thorough and diligent work of the investigators. At the end of the day, the focus of this investigation is to bring justice to those victims and to our community. At this time, I'd like to introduce Sheriff Jones to talk a little bit about the case in the county.
Good afternoon. On May 5th, 1992, at just about 8:30 p.m., our victim, who was 52 years old at the time, arrived home, parked in her garage, and entered her residence, deactivated her alarm, and was almost immediately accosted and assaulted by someone who was lying in wait inside of her residence. For the next over 3 hours, she was assaulted, sexually assaulted, and various sexual acts were committed against her until ultimately the suspect fled the residence. Since that time, I know much will be made from this, and as time goes on, about the technology of the DNA analysis, as well as the suspect, and learning more about the suspect. But there's really 2 points that I want to make. Number one is that regardless of the emerging and growing technologies of DNA or whatever may come next, it comes down to, as it did in this case, detectives who are not only willing to put in the dogged hours and work to be able to take that technology and come to a resolution with a suspect arrest, but also the detectives who never gave up on finding justice for these victims. And that leads me to my second point, the victims. Although much will be made of the suspect as it goes forward, as is often the case in these instances, we must not and never forget that there are victims in this case that have waited far too long to, although they haven't achieved justice yet, have certainly taken their first step on that journey of justice that, again, they've waited far too long. So with that, I would like to introduce the FBI's Special Agent in Charge, Sean Ray.
Thanks, Sheriff and Chief. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me just begin by saying it's an honor for the FBI to have been able to assist our partners in this investigation. As the Chief mentioned, Sacramento Police Department contacted us and asked us to assist with the investigation based on their belief that the subject responsible for these heinous crimes was currently in the area of Atlanta, Georgia. Based on that request, I assigned a special agent and a actual Sacramento PD task force officer to jump on the investigation and work with our FBI field office in Atlanta, Georgia to help identify where the subject was living and pattern of life. And in that regard, we had a surveillance team set up from our Atlanta field office that surveilled the subject. And then actually ended up recovering some DNA evidence at a restaurant based on a request from the Sacramento Police Department. Following that, and securing local warrants for the subject's arrest, we were asked to, again, help effectuate the arrest of the subject in the Atlanta metro area. As mentioned this past Friday, agents from our Atlanta field office set up on the subject's residence and arrested him as he was coming out. The arrest was without incident, and obviously the investigation. So again, honor for us to have been able to help, and I would just like to echo what was said before and thank my partners in the law enforcement agencies behind me for sticking with these investigations over decades and not giving up, not losing sight of the victims that are out there, and bringing someone that we believe is responsible for these crimes to face justice, and hopefully bring some solace to the victims. So I thank them for their steadfastness and their commitment to this, and all the men and women in these different agencies that never give up in any of the investigations that they're committed to working. And I'd like to thank my Atlanta field office, because they dropped everything to make this case a priority for crimes that occurred in California, across the country, and they dedicated significant resources to assist. So I wanted to publicly thank them for their involvement. Thank you. I'd like to introduce the Sacramento County District Attorney Anne Marie Schubert.
Good afternoon. Long before DNA was ever contemplated or ever used in a courtroom, a well-known forensic scientist by the name of Paul Kirk said, "Wherever he steps, whatever he touches, whatever he leaves, even unconsciously, will serve as a silent witness against him. Not only his fingerprints or his footprints, his hair, the fibers from his clothes, the paint that he leaves behind, the blood or semen that he deposits, all of these will bear mute witness against him. This is evidence that does not forget. It is not confused by the excitement of the moment. It is not absent because human witnesses are. It is factual evidence. Only human failure to find it, to study it, and to understand it will diminish its value. This case is about passion, persistence, patience, ingenuity, innovation, and perhaps most importantly, about a willingness to pioneer the ability to not only solve, but to prosecute a case, a crime, even if those crimes occurred over a quarter of a century ago. At a time when DNA was barely even heard of, when it came to solving crime, law enforcement found the evidence in these cases, meticulously collecting it and preserving it, hoping but never really knowing if someday they would find an answer. Evidence from 3 separate but equally brutal sexual assaults committed by a stranger, for those in Sacramento, for women that were in their own home in the peace and sanctity and the privacy of their homes, one in the city and one in the county. This case is about a forward-thinking DNA analyst from our crime lab who knew the value of preserving rape kits far longer than the law required at the time. It's about persistence and passion for one of my all-time favorite detectives, Pete Willover, who called me one day in December of 1999 to question if there was anything he could do with a few of his sexual assault cases because the statute of limitations was going to run in a few months. And perhaps it was serendipity, because at the same time Detective Willover called, the Sacramento Bee ran a story about a prosecutor in Wisconsin who had decided to charge an unknown assailant alleging the culprit's DNA as his identification. It's about ingenuity and teamwork, not just from within the DA's office, including my teammate and my colleague, Lori Earle, who now happens to be a judge, as well as seasoned detectives like Detective Willover and Sheriff's Detective Donna Simmons. All that teamwork aimed at one thing, bringing an accused rapist to justice. So after finding that evidence, studying it, and understanding it, 2 days before the statute of limitations was set to run, on March 21st of 2000, our office filed California's first ever John Doe DNA warrant, alleging the person's DNA as his identification. In another John Doe DNA case, ironically that was Detective Willover's, that was filed a few months after this, when we did in fact catch the person and prosecute him, then trial judge Attorney Anne Marie, who happens to be our Chief Justice, ruled here in Sacramento that this new and innovative method of charging someone by their DNA and thereby preserving the statute of limitations was lawful. As Judge Cantil Sakaui said over 18 years ago, given today's changing addresses of a mobile society, addresses aren't good either. Anyone can tell you that when you go serve a warrant or look into a computer system, there are 3 addresses. Additionally, given today's cosmetic surgery choices, I know it can change body shape, face structure, hair, and eyes. I don't know what, in fact, is a true identifier. But in my opinion, it certainly appears today, as of today, DNA is unalterable in the year 2001, 18 years ago. And it appears to be the best identifier of a person that we have. So for 19 years, we have waited to put a face to that DNA profile. For the victims in this case, they have waited well over 2 decades to put a face to the man who sexually assaulted them. And then, a little over a year ago, came this concept of investigative genetic genealogy, the latest and perhaps the greatest advancement to help law enforcement find the truth and solve violent crime. Through extraordinary collaboration and persistence, the name and the face of that profile has revealed itself. Here in Sacramento, our complaint was filed in March of 2000. In that complaint, we have charged Mr. Mantufel, the face of that profile, in count 1 with the crime of torture against the crime involving the county's case with the use of a knife. In count 2, he's charged again with torture involving the case involving the city's victim, including the use of a knife. Counts 3 through 6 involving the city case, multiple counts of rape plus infliction of great bodily injury with the use of a knife. Count 7, count of sodomy against the same victim in the city of Sacramento, plus the infliction of great bodily injury and the use of a knife. That John Doe DNA profile is Mark Mantufel, and when he is brought to Sacramento, his true name will be added to that complaint. So in essence, this case represents so much. The dedication of law enforcement, the critical importance of keeping rape kits and testing those kits no matter how long ago those crimes occurred, the need for passion and persistence, and a desire to pioneer our law enforcement tools so that violent criminals can be identified and brought to justice, even if that happened decades ago. This has been an extraordinary team effort by so many people over so many years. Sacramento Police Department, the Sheriff's Department, our crime lab, the FBI, and the DA's office, with one aim in mind, and that is to bring justice to these victims. So today, on this day, July 1st of 2019, I am proud to say we have put a face to that DNA profile. And today, quarter of a century later, a silent witness has spoken. And with that, I'd like to introduce Yolo County District Attorney Jeff Reisig.
In January of 1994, a 22-year-old college student went for a jog. About 7 o'clock in the evening, she was going to get some dinner at the local market. As she jogged through a well-known, safe neighborhood in Davis, California, she was approached and grabbed by a masked man. He tased her and dragged her away, where he committed monstrous crimes. Today, 25 years later, we know the name of that man behind the mask. Crimes like this alter the lives of victims and their families in incredible ways. I can tell you that the victim in the case out of Yolo County has been notified that the man who did this to her is in custody. She's very happy. These crimes also haunt communities, and this crime has haunted the community of Davis for 25 years. However, the news again today is that predators and monsters can't hide forever any longer. Because of the science and the hard work of committed law enforcement professionals, like those here today, the clock is ticking on these criminals, and their time is up. On behalf of Yolo County and the City of Davis and the Police Department, I want to thank the Sacramento Police Department for leading this investigation with the Sacramento DA's office and the Sacramento County Sheriff's Office. Thank you.
At this time, we'll take any questions. One at a time, please.
Can we identify the DNA metric with which you were able to connect this suspect? I know with the East Area Rapist, it was the GEDmatch service. I'm wondering if we can elaborate a little bit more on how that was done.
At this time, we can't answer that question. Again, the investigation is still ongoing.
Sac State, you mentioned this person spent some time there. Can we elaborate on his capacity when he was there? Was he a student? Was he on the staff or faculty at all?
We know for some time he did live in the Sacramento area, attended Sacramento State University as a student, and also worked part-time as a lecturer for Sac State.
In what field? Do you know?
Field of...
He was a lecturer. Do we know what subject was his area? Was it
It was in law enforcement,
law
criminal
enforcement.
justice system.
I know you declined to identify the source through which you identified the connection, the DNA connection, but I'm wondering if you can elaborate on whether this was through a family member, through a cousin, or someone who had a genetic match that you were able to ultimately track him down.
I'm just going to talk in general because obviously there's sensitivity and we're very much appreciative of the balance that we need to find between privacy of individuals and public safety. So just the concept of genetic genealogy is that suspects, the crime scene DNA is put into a database, and the genetic database, and relatives have put their DNA in there. I'm not going to say how close or how distant they are, but there's no question that it's, you're provided a list. You're never looking at somebody's actual DNA, but you're provided a potential match that may be related. It could go all the way. It could be something from a close relative to something that you got to spend months trying to figure out how to build the trees, as I call it, and develop what potential relationships. And that's where, as the sheriff said, it all comes down to detective work, because it's passion and persistence of trying to use your good old-fashioned police work to identify individuals that may be related, that happen to live here or work here or falls in that tree.
Sure. So follow up to that question. Obviously, as you mentioned, it's a matter of striking a balance between privacy and
Right.
solving these crimes and
Absolutely.
receiving justice for these victims.
Right.
But I know that in cases like GEDmatch, they have a policy where only suspected murders can be is where they'll allow law enforcement to access. So at
Well,
some
actually,
point,
GEDmatch it's rape and murders.
okay.
And then there's other ones, so I don't want to talk about which ones because that's part of the investigation. But GEDmatch, and I'm not saying this is GEDmatch, but GEDmatch's policy has now been to adopt the federal definition of violent crime, which is greater than it was a year ago. So, but in this case, I don't think there's any question in my mind that this is a violent crime.
This is the now, I guess, second really high-profile case that
It's
we've
the
been
third, actually.
third. Okay, that we've been able to.
Not
So I
Not
mean
to
that,
get too
that,
excited, but it is the third.
so that leads into my question, which is just, can we expect to see more of this, going back and maybe testing out more rape kits that were previously unsolved? Can we expect to see this process happen, for
Well, in a little over a year, you've seen 3 cases come out of Sacramento, and I think that's because we have tremendous law enforcement here. And, you know, the message should be clear. If you committed a violent crime in this community and you left your DNA, you can expect that we're going to try to solve that crime and bring you to justice. So there's plenty of violent crimes that are unsolved here, unfortunately, that, you know, if the tools are there, we're going to use them.
I wonder if there's a message that you would send to smaller departments all across the country, because I know I've seen and covered stories where there are thousands of untested rape kits within counties and states, and I wonder if you would encourage these smaller departments to put more resources toward that, or is it a very expensive
Well, I think
process?
it's somewhat of a niche because it's not a simple process. I mean, we're fortunate here because we now have experience and we've got a genealogy team now here that exists, and we've got incredible people from the sheriff and the police and the FBI and everybody that are part of that. But I also am very cognizant and very proactive about making sure that we are training law enforcement across this country, really even across this world, on what is the best practice to do this, because we want to make sure that we do strike that appropriate balance. So, I mean, obviously, in our view, this is clearly the right kind of case.
Mr. Mantefol's crimes connected to that of the Parkway rapist?
Again, the investigation is still ongoing at this time.
On the Sacramento Sheriff's Office webpage, there's a cold case page for sexual assaults, and the third one down, it's John Doe rape series. Is this that series?
I'm not sure. I'm unfamiliar with the series that you're talking about on the webpage, so I don't know. But this was, if it was a series about multiple acts in Sacramento County, then this would not be, because the ones we know of at this point, there's only the one instance of sexual assault in this series that we know of right now. So if it indicated more than one in Sacramento County, it would not be that one.
Because the other two were out of your jurisdiction?
Well, maybe, I'm sorry, I wasn't clear. So in this series, there's only one that occurred in Sacramento County that we are aware of right now.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm unfamiliar with the one that's on the website, the third one down that you mentioned. If that one indicates more than one in Sacramento County, then they're not the same. So that's what I'm saying. So that's not to say there might not be more connected to this, but DNA connections that we have right now, there's only one in Sacramento County.
Okay.
Can you speak to whether Manteuffel was a suspect for a long period of time? I mean, was he recently identified with the help of DNA, or have you kind of been watching him for quite some time?
So again, like I mentioned, the investigation is still ongoing. And again, as we mentioned, our detectives are still working diligently on this investigation. And so we know that Mr. Manteufel has lived in various parts throughout the country. And so that we are asking for anyone with information, whether the victim or witness, to please come forward. Again, we don't know. There could be others connected to Mr. Manteufel. And so again, still an ongoing case, and we do strongly encourage our community or any witness out there, I mean, back east, anywhere, to please call our investigation number at 916-808-0650. Again, this is still an ongoing investigation, and again, we hope that we can bring justice not only to the victims or those victims, but as well as to our community.
Is he already in the process of being extradited?
He's still in Atlanta.
Is there any indication that he used any other names in the course of his career or life?
Again, the investigation is still ongoing.
Wondering if we could clarify, you said he worked for the Federal Bureau of Prisons when he was in Georgia, and then he was, again, lecturing at Sac State, also a student there before that. During that time, when he was at Sacramento State, was he employed in any other way, do we know?
You mean, did he have like two jobs at the same time? Is that what
Was
you're
he
asking?
a member of generally of law enforcement at that time?
Well, like I mentioned earlier, we do know that he did serve as a part-time lecturer at Sac State. And again, the investigation is still ongoing. We do know that he's lived in various parts of throughout the country. So
Do we know how long he lived here in the Sacramento area?
that's still ongoing as well. Still trying to determine a lot. As you can imagine, this stems from decades, and so there's a lot of information our detectives and investigators are still having to gather and look at.
And I'm sorry if I missed this tidbit earlier, but the time that he was in Sacramento, that overlapped that time when he committed those 3 crimes, allegedly.
So again, the investigation is still ongoing. We're still having to look at timelines and everything.
sorry if I missed this. It sounded like the one case in Yolo County, he attacked somebody who was running. The other case, it sounded like he was actually going to their homes. Did he personally know any of these victims, or do we know from the victims if they had any sort of relationship with this?
That's all part of the investigation at this time, as far as the connection and everything else.
And I believe I heard mention of the victim in Yolo County and in the Sacramento cases were contacted. Was the Sacramento County victim contacted?
Yes.
All right, any other questions? Again, we highly encourage anyone with information to please call the Sacramento Police Department. Thank you.